When you say Minnesota's North Shore, you might think, if you're not familiar with the place, about maybe beaches, I don't know, something like that's coastal or something like that, which the area does have some of those spots, but there's so much more. Photographing in this region is a lot of fun, and I highly recommend you do it. And it's also relatively compact, so you don't have too far to go from place to place. In this episode, I'm sharing some photos that I made during my visit in mid-September 2021. This is Latitude Photography Podcast, episode 134 for November 14, 2021. Welcome to Latitude Photography Podcast, the show for travel outdoor photographers to come and learn about new regions, to come and learn new techniques. Maybe it's something that you just need to be encouraged to get out there and shoot. Well, that's what I'm here for. I want to help you to get that energy, get out there and get shooting and making your own pictures. Let's talk a little bit about this North Shore region. This location is really just wonderful. As I was doing my research and I was unfolding more and more items about this place, I was just really starting to fall in love with the place. And one of the best resources was this book by Lisa Crayford. It is Waterfalls of Minnesota. Now, certainly there are plenty of waterfalls in Minnesota. And when you're out there, at least on the North Shore, there's just river after river after river. And a lot of them are fed by the Boundary Waters canoe area, which is along the border there with Canada. So before I get too far, I should point out the fact that this is on YouTube as well as in the audio, just like I did with my episode for Isle Royale National Park. I just figured, I'm talking about this trip report, talking about all these photographs. I want an opportunity to showcase these items for you. They're on the YouTube, but certainly you're going to get the slide deck images there on the show notes website and in the Facebook group. So if you'd like to reference those images as you're listening to this episode, in the audio only, you're going to be able to pull those up and take a look at those. All right, so I started there in Grand Portage State Park. You may recall from the previous episode, I went to Isle Royale National Park. I then spent, Sunday night in a hotel there in Grand Portage. And then I started going down the line from north to south, and Grand Portage State Park, then to the Judge Magny State Park, which is where Devil's Kettle is. I just decided to call it Devil's Kettle because that's the interesting portion of the place. Went up to Portage Brook Falls, a nice little tiny falls. Centered a few things around Grand Marais because that's about the only major town in the area. A couple of grocery stores and such, so that was a nice place. Then I stayed and camped at Cascade River State Park. And then I also stayed for 2 nights at Teregooch State Park. But I also then photographed at Onion River, Oberg Mountain, Split Rock, Lighthouse, and Gooseberry Falls on my way out on Friday. Let's talk just a little bit about Lake Superior. This is a massive body of water, and we're looking at a surface area of 31,700 square miles. Just huge. The length from east to west is 350 miles, and from north to south, 160 miles. And it has a maximum depth of 1,276 feet. And then the volume, that is how much water it holds, 3 quadrillion gallons, which whenever I see something listed in gallons, for some reason, ever since I was a kid, I always picture it as a milk jug. And so you have 3 quadrillion milk jugs out there. Anyway, water turnover, 191 to 199 years. So with all of those rivers that flow into it, whether it's in Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, or Canada, and you have one outlet, it takes almost 200 years to totally cycle through all of that water. That's a lot of water, and it's also not flowing through very fast. It takes a long time to cycle through all that water. Starting with our first photograph, here we are in Grand Portage State Park, and we've got an image here of a rock wall that we're looking at, and it leads you from the left and off to the right as it kind of recedes because it's going off in the distance. And then we've got a couple of rocks. You can tell I'm standing on a rock, and we've got a couple of rocks here in the foreground. And then off in the lower right-hand side, we have some additional rocks. And then, of course, we have the river. This is the Pigeon River flowing through, and we have the river coming from the lower left, sweeping on up into the central portion of the frame. And there's a couple things to note. Certainly the shutter speed I'm using, a little bit on the longer side of the shutter speed to let that water have some motion, have some silkiness, but not so long where it's just purely getting rid of all detail. This is a really fun place to shoot. I was really intrigued by this location anyway, because you're right on the border. That rock wall over there is Canada. I could easily throw a little pebble and hit Canada. Probably in this image, I'm maybe 10 feet from what I considered to be the border. I considered the border to be that area, the central area where that water is flowing through. Whether or not that's the exact correct place to say, hey, this is where the agreed upon border is, I don't really know. And when I looked at my GPS, I was like, I'm flirting with disaster here. But I asked a park ranger about it, and he said, well, you didn't get your feet wet, so the Border Patrol folk aren't going to be too picky with you. I was like, yeah, that was kind of my point. It probably wouldn't be, I would think it maybe wouldn't be a big deal, but still, there's just these things, I don't want to push my luck. So I was careful to not actually get my feet wet in this location. This next picture, we're looking up the other direction. So we're looking to the northwest in this picture, and you can see the Canadian rock wall brilliantly lit by the sun. And then we just have the water flowing, this other direction here. I'm basically in the same exact spot. I did move just a little bit so I could get around this massive rock that was in my way. But otherwise, I'm basically in the same exact spot as the other picture, just turned around 180 degrees roughly. I really liked how the water was flowing through these rocks in the foreground. And then, of course, the main central channel of where the water is going off on the right-hand side. This next picture is a black and white conversion, and I chose to do this in part because on the right-hand side, it was extremely contrasty. Those areas where you see a little bit of highlights coming in on the rock and then the clouds in the sky, those were completely blown out in the frame that I was using here on the left-hand side of the image. And so I used some luminosity masking with the Lumenzia, I want to say plugin, but that's the wrong term, the Lumenzia extension for Photoshop, and was able to bring in that detail. But then I also thought, the black and white is just really helping to make this image more about that texture in the rock. And here the water's really calm anyway. I just figured it was a nice way to just help us think about other things, but then also that notion of blending those highlights. I didn't have to spend, shall I say, as much time to make it feel more natural. I could have spent probably another 2 to 5 minutes and it would have been fine in color, but I was just like, I want to do black and white anyway. So I think things just got a little more easy to do, maybe I could say, because I converted to the black and white. But this is a much more calm image for sure. And we're on the US side here. I'm at the very end of the area where I could walk up into this canyon area, because obviously you can see there's no more rocks. But I am certainly closer to the US side, much closer to the US side. It widens out here a little bit. And then we have that major foreground anchoring a triangular rock. I really like how that is pointing you up towards the rock wall. And you have all that luscious goodness of all that texture, all those lines in the rocks, and everything taking you on down the canyon then. There's a place called High Falls there on the Pigeon River. Certainly on the right-hand side of the image, that's Canada. The left-hand side, that is the US. There was a brief period where I saw some people, they came in and they sat right on the edge of that rock. Now, this waterfall is in the neighborhood of 120 feet tall. And so certainly it's not too terribly tall. It's not like it's your 300 feet or nothing. But if you were to fall down that, certainly that would be bad news. On the left-hand side here of this frame, I've got a black and white rendition. The reason I liked this and wanted to convert this to black and white, a lot of these in this series, you're going to see black and white conversions. The thing about that is, for me in waterfalls, it really focuses our attention on the contrast in texture between the rock, whatever the water is flowing through and around and things like that. And then also, of course, the smoother water that we're creating with the longer shutter speed. In this case, we've got a fairly long shutter speed. That water is a little extra silky, but that wonderful texture of the rock just really comes through and is accentuated by the black and white. We're more thinking about, I should say, the texture, the shapes, the forms of the rock because of the black and white. And then this other shot where I left it in color, we then have, the vertical, we have the whole nature of it here. Now, in this location, you are standing on some kind of boardwalk. You have this wooden platform that you're walking out on, some other stairs you can climb up to this different region. And you don't have that much variety of where you're looking at, which angle you're coming in on the subject. Now, the trail does go up further, and I imagine you could probably do the same thing that those Canadians did, and you could probably get really close to it. I did not choose to do that, but that is something you could explore and do a little more. But on this one, I decided to leave in color just so we could then see what the natural color looks like. I think it's important for us to know what it just plain looks like. But when it comes to my interpretation of the scene, I personally prefer black and white. And that's where I really like the idea that Clyde Butcher puts out in this notion of black and white photography. He converted to completely black and white photography back in the mid-'80s. And he's a photographer down there in Florida doing the Everglades. And he likes to say that color is a representation, black and white is an interpretation. And when I saw that, it was literally just, I don't know, maybe a week, 2 weeks ago now that I saw that. And I was just like, yep, I love it. That is perfect. Black and white is an interpretation, and we just have a different sense about a place, a different, I don't necessarily want to say the word feeling, but a different understanding for what the photographer's point is when you're looking at a black and white. And the photographer has an opportunity to change things in a way that generally doesn't get them in trouble with the photo purists. Sometimes it does, most of the time it doesn't though, because we had black and white forever. We're just used to that notion of converting to black and white, but still that notion of interpreting the scene, I think that's perfect. So thank you, Clyde, for sharing that out. That's good stuff. All right, I then went down to Devil's Kettle in the Judge Magny State Park. Now, I did actually try and find that Portage Brook Falls, could not find it. It's such a small place, and the description that Lisa Crayford gave me, I don't know if I misinterpreted something, but I just couldn't find it. So I went on down to this state park where Devil's Kettle is, and then the ranger there was very helpful. She was like, oh yeah, it's right here. It's not marked on the map she gave me, but she put a nice X there and was telling me, how far it is and whatnot. Now it is on the Google map. It's just once you take off the highway that's right there on the shore, you don't have any signal. And so I'm out there 13 or so miles and I just have no signal. I don't know where this place is exactly. It turns out it is on the Google map as well, fairly decently. You still need to really look for the trailhead because it's just a very tiny break in the bushes there, but you can still find it. It's not too bad. Well, Devil's Kettle is a very interesting waterfall. It is about a mile up the trail, not a too terrible trail. It's not steep at all, but it's not just a flat walk either. And you get up there and you see this double waterfall, one on the left, one on the right. And the one on the right, of course, we can see where it's coming. And the beauty about the one on the left is going down this pit and you just don't know where it's going. It is, Lisa, in that conversation I had with her, looked back probably, May or so, where I talked with Lisa Crayford, the author of this Waterfalls book. And I talked with her about this location, and she was like, you just have to go to Devil's Kettle because there's just this mystery about this one section of the waterfall. And so she said that they dumped dye down there, they dumped some ping pong balls, and they just never understood. They never saw where they came out. So where does that water go? Or how did it, tie up all that stuff when they dumped it in? If it just comes out right below, where did the other stuff go? So it's just a really great place to photograph as well because it's very easy access. Now, I was there, of course, in September, and the water is a lot lower than it is in the springtime. So you have the opportunity to get really close to the falls, and you can walk on and around and in the river, and it's just a fantastic spot. I really like being able to do that and get really close up and personal with the subjects. On this particular image here that we're looking at in the next slide, the tree was very intriguing to me. And I actually tried out a different shot or a series of shots so I could focus stack. But I got back here in the office and was just like, I'm glad I figured it out. I'm glad I tried it out. But still, the focus stack, I just decided that was just going to be kind of silly because this is not an image where I need absolutely everything in focus. I need this sense of place, and that's what the out of focus waterfall gives me. It gives me a sense of place. We have this almost cliff's edge type thing, but then these 3 branches reaching out that are very even. And that's what this image was about. It was about the stability of this tree precariously perched on this edge. And then we have the waterfall and the other things going on behind it. So I just really liked how that came across. Then got really close to the falls. And here we have in the same frame, same slide, an interpretation of the black and white and then the color. And when I go black and white, I usually take that clarity slider and I touch it up a little more. I tend to push it just a little more. I like to see that extra texture, that extra contrast in the midtones that it does for you. I like to see that pushed a little bit in the black and white. It gives you a little more sense of what that surface of that rock is about. When you have the color, I just don't like the way that comes across. I think it still has the same effect with less clarity, but because we have the color. But again, with black and white, there's just something there where that interpretation just comes in to an effect, and I really do like how that comes across. So we're going to see a lot of black and whites in this presentation. This next image, Devil's Kettle still, I'm basically right on top of the fall. I don't usually like to shoot from right on top of the fall. I don't have a drone to get that, perspective where you're looking straight down, and in pretty much most of these locations, drones aren't allowed anyway, so couldn't do that. But I wanted, since this was such a unique place where that water goes down into that chasm, I was just like, I really want to do what I can to push the limits. And so here we have the water coming in from the lower right, wrapping up and around to the center of the image, around this rock formation that I'm standing on, and then it goes down the chute. And then on the very far left-hand side, we have this river coming through, very calm, very serene almost. And we just have these 2 contrasting areas, this very down in the canyon type river that's calm, and then this flowing water coming up here. And then, of course, the rock as it's arranged around all these areas of water that's flowing. And so that idea, since you know the story, since you know the mystery of the place, I think this is an image that kind of helps finish telling the story. This is not an image, in my opinion, that would be as successful if it were only living by itself. I think by itself, sure, it's a fine image, but it really helps tell the story and complete the story of saying, yeah, wow, it goes down there. And that's it. And I got as close as I was comfortable getting, because if I were to trip and fall, I'm looking at something, I want to be able to say, hey, I can grab onto this, I can do that. I can keep myself basically from falling down that chute and never seeing my wife and kids again. I don't want to do that. So I get as close as I am comfortable getting without getting into that danger zone, what I view as that danger zone of says, if you were to trip and fall, see you later, as in never again kind of a thing. And I just don't want to do that. So I didn't get that close, but I was still able to get that water looping up and around that rock. And that's the thing that I really like about this image is I still can see, I have that trail, that visual trail leading the eye right down the chute. This next frame is the only image I have from Portage Brook Falls. I did shoot a lot of others, but it's such a small fall, number one. But number two, I really wanted to focus on this dynamic that we have here. On the left-hand side, it feels like a black and white image. On the right-hand side, it's just rich and luscious color. And then we have this little trickle of a fall. The fall overall is in the neighborhood of maybe 8 feet tall. What we're looking at here, we're lucky if we have 3 feet of it represented. But this is where pretty much all the action is, where it starts to spread out a little bit, and you have the sprinkling of the water over the different areas of the rock. But of course, it's splashing on, and actually just rained a little bit, so that's why it's super wet over there on the right-hand side with the little tiny ferns. And that just gives that little punch of color, and it gives you a really good sense of the place and a sense of what the North Shore is like. Now, this is probably 13, 14 miles away from the water's edge, the Lake Superior, shore. But the whole region is just this lush, beautiful location where all this different foliage, it's just a beautiful spot, nature paradise, and definitely encourage you to go. All right, I then camped at Cascade River State Park. The beauty about this location was the trailhead was probably 50 to 80 feet, somewhere in there, from my campsite. And then you just go on up the river, you cross a bridge, you go on down the river, and it goes even further than that bridge was. There's just so many things where you can get in because, again, the river is low. You can get in close. You can take a look at the details of these little falls. If I was there in the springtime, there's no way, like in this next frame here, there's no way I would have been able to get this close and this personal, this intimate with the flowing water. We have lots of energy coming from the flowing water, but of course the solid rock coming in and just glistening and giving you that sense of stability. That's what these waterfalls to me are largely about. This next frame where we have a slightly backed off view, the water is crashing down and then it comes in and flows right down into the central part of the image to the lower right part of the image. And then off here on the lower left side, we've got this little eddy going about. And so the water bubbles are kind of swirling a little bit. There's just a lot of motion, a lot of activity is probably what I want to say happening in this image. And that's one thing I just really like about waterfall images. Not only does it give me a sense of a physical shift, I've done some looking into this, and they say, the negative ions or whatever doing this and that and whatever, and that has a good balance in your mental outlook or whatever. Okay, that's all fine and good. I tend to not worry so much about necessarily the science, but just the sensation. It is relaxing when I'm there. In our backyard, when we moved to this place a little over a year ago, we have a waterfall feature there, and I just love it. And that white noise that it provides, and of course, when you're here and you just have tons and tons of falls, there's just something about it that really puts me at ease, and I'm really able to just get into the groove very quickly and easily and exercise my creativity. Now, I didn't have this spot on the map, Temperance River State Park. The Temperance River is a fantastic place, and if you can shoot there and shoot the waterfalls there, I think it's going to be awesome. But I don't have any waterfalls from there because the day I was there, it was extremely bright. It was one of the only days where I had just super, super harsh light. And it was also very steep. So as you park in the parking lot on the road and you're going on up, if you have a tough time climbing hills and such, that first 300 feet or so is extremely steep. So just be aware of that. However, what you are gifted with basically is an amazing set of caverns, I should say, canyons, caverns, whatever, where the water has carved its way through, and then you can get these images of the sweeping rock with the waterfall in it as well. Just fantastic stuff. It's just you need a cloudy day to get good images, because I was there extremely bright day, and the difference in light between the brilliantly lit rock and the shadow waterfall was in the neighborhood of at least 12 stops. And when I have something like that, I'm trying to expose for the waterfall, there's just so much flare coming in that when I'm shooting, it's just like, this takes the fun out of it. I don't want to spend all that time in Photoshop if I'm not, in one sense, if I'm not confident I'm going to get some good results, but because of the flare happening, pretty sure I'm not going to get good results. So I'm just like, nah, I don't really care for it. I don't want to do that. I'll do that work in images like you saw there at the beginning at Portage State Park, Grand Portage State Park. And I knew that would turn out fine because it wasn't 12 stops difference. It was only about 6 to 9 stops difference for those differences in light areas. But when you get the 12 plus stops difference, it's just so much, and it's not something that I'm interested in worrying about. So in this really shaded area right along the river, I was able to grab these roots. These roots and these trees are everywhere on Isle Royal and here on Minnesota's North Shore. And I just was really intrigued by the erosion that was happening, because when you have the high flow in the springtime, you've got the water taking away all the dirt. But then how does the tree get its nutrients? It's just amazing. But then, of course, all these rocks are still stuck in the clutch of the roots. I just really was intrigued by that. So I got this shot of those roots. All right. On the next day, then, I was all by myself, Teregooch State Park. Teregooch is an interesting place. You've got a fantastic wayside, rest area wayside with a beautiful facility for the visitor center. And that's where I had my picnic and such. But the campground area is split into two different regions, two different areas. The main campground, and then you've got this hike-in campground, or cart-in campground, they call it. And that's where I stayed. So after I got set up at my camp, I then hiked on back out. And then I went up the trail to what they call High Falls. Along the way, about a mile on up the trail, this is where you come into this part, the Two-Step Falls. This place is way better, in my opinion, than the High Falls. The High Falls is another half a mile beyond. So with this Two-Step Falls, here in this first image of Two-Step, we've got the water coming in from the right-hand side, and it flows down the little waterfall, and then it kind of splits, and you got these two tails as it flows on through. I was fairly intrigued by that, so I had to get a picture of that tail. What I really like about this image is the idea that it is flowing on through, and it doesn't always force you, depending kind of sort of on who you are, but it doesn't force you to stop and recycle yourself. And I usually like to do that. Don't get me wrong. And when I'm composing an image, I usually like to say, hey, how can I keep the viewer's eye in the image and not let them go through? But here with this subject, a waterfall, it's okay, I think, to allow the viewer to take this journey and complete the journey and move on. That's what the water is doing. Why can't we allow our viewer to do that? So as you follow that water on off to the left-hand edge, you go on. But notice I did darken that edge just a little bit. So in some cases, many people are going to be slowed down because of that darkening. They're either going to go up into the trees and come back down the waterfall, or they're going to wander along the rocks and look at the little detail there. Then at the lower right-hand corner, they get that log and they got shot right back up to the waterfall. But I think oftentimes most people are just going to flow on out of the frame, and I'm okay with that in this particular shot. The beauty about this place is, of course, it's called Two-Step. You have two waterfalls right there. And so I'm able to walk on the other side of that log and then climb up those little steps in the rock and then go and take a look at this spot here in this next frame. It is also possible, if you're at the base of the lower fall, you could frame up both of these. And I did that. I just wasn't as excited about those images as I am about these that I'm showing you here. So we've got two images, almost the same exact location. It's just different framings, a vertical on the right-hand side and a horizontal on the left-hand side. Trying to focus on ways, trying to get ideas on how we can focus on that notion of the water coming down into the frame and out the bottom or out to the left-hand side. And we're in the neighborhood of a half a second, maybe a little bit longer in these images. Walked on up a little bit closer and got a nice detailed shot. The thing I really like about this shot is that implied triangle that we have, or almost the exact triangle we have with the shape and the form of the waterfall as it comes in. We have just a little bit of water along the bottom. We'll see another shot here in a moment where I have a lot more water in the bottom, at the bottom of the frame. But this is a series that I put on my Instagram, and I asked the Instagram folk saying, hey, what do you like? And so we had a 1/6 of a second. We then had 1/5 of a second, then 0.6 seconds. And I think the next one's something like 2 seconds or 1.5 seconds. I forget. And most folk like what I liked. And that was the 1/5 of a second. The 1/6, just not quite enough movement in that water down below. And there was virtually zero difference in those two frames as far as the water cascading down the rock is concerned. But that water down below, that's what made the frame in the 1/5 of a second. It then became too silky, too soft when you extended your shutter speed. And that's just something you need to do when you're out there to get it just right for yourself. What is it that you prefer? Experiment with those shutter speeds, because different flowing water, how close you are to it, things like that, it will have an effect on how it's rendered in your frame. This next image, and I should comment more on that triangle, actually. It just creates a sense of strength, visual stability. And we just know those rocks are not moving, but then we have that visual stability of the overall triangle. And so all these other areas, the rock and trees in the background, the water flowing, those are all subject to this really strong, massive set of rocks. That also happens to be a triangle, which has some built-in with that shape, visual stability. All right, these next two images, just some fun using Lightroom's color grading feature. So on the left-hand side, we've got a little bit of a blue tint, and then on the right-hand side, just a straight black and white. I liked the blue just because, it's cool. The water gives you a cool feeling. On this one, totally decided to go super silky smooth on the water because it's a little more detail, and I wanted to enhance the contrast in textures between the rock and the water. So by just letting that shutter speed go a little longer, was able to do that. These next three images, different shutter speeds. So just some examples of different shutter speeds. And this first one that I'm going to show you and highlight, I actually like a lot better than the others. And the reason is, and it's the longer shutter speed one. We've been talking about shutter speed already a little bit. But the reason I like this one better is because it's a greater contrast with the shadow areas, the pieces that are off to the right-hand side. So let's go ahead and zoom in on that. It's those pieces on the right-hand side that I really appreciate how this comes through compared to the other images. We have a little more detail there with the water doing its thing. And then it is not bothered by the really smooth water off to the side. That's a supporting element. The main character is this shadow area, but then everything else is the supporting elements or the stage, as it were. When we go to these next images, because there's more texture in the water with these slower shutter speeds, and then it also diminishes the effects, in my opinion, on the main character, those the black rock overhangs, we're competing too much, and too much attention is given to the water area. But what does that tell you as it relates to a story? What does it tell you? It doesn't really tell you much. It's just water gushing. Where this other one, there's a little more of that, main character, supporting element. We just have this different relationship between these two pieces. And then we go to this, and again, just experimenting with shutter speeds. I just don't find it as strong. Now, certainly you may have a different opinion. And let's look at this final image of the set where it's an even shorter shutter speed. I just don't think that achieves the goals that that I have for showcasing this scene. Now, if I were to shift my framing a little bit and make the image more about where the water is crashing, then maybe this would work better. But with that overhang rock, that first one is really the key. Now, this next image, full frame in the slide deck, so we don't see anything else. Well, I got the Latitude stuff on the side, but anyway, we've seen this roughly before, but now we're looking at a lot more of that water where it's crashing through. And also that's where this 1/5 of a second really works. You can really see some great features, some great texture, great motion without totally just washing it away to complete silkiness. Like we do have, of course, pretty much in the tumbling water, that's going at a different speed. So it's really fast and it's really silky, but it slows down as it's flowing away, and we still get the wave action as it's moving away from the rock face there. All right, these next two shots, this is when you get really on top of that second waterfall in the two-step region, and you're just looking on up the river. And I liked how this image came together, but the next frame I really like a lot better. We do have in this frame a great sense of the flow of the water coming from the right, going off to the left, but it has to go around this element that's right smack dab, almost perfectly in the middle, just about. And that to me is basically, it's just a little bit of a visual trip, as it were. It's a fine rock. It's just part of the thing. But as a photographer, I need to work it and put it in a place where it doesn't cause my viewer to have these problems as they're transitioning, as they're enjoying the image. So I've positioned myself in a different spot. and got that same water coming in from the right-hand side, but now it takes a much sharper turn and it makes it more of a feature rather than, kind of a bug, so to speak. So now that rocky area is the prominent piece in the scene, and it's about how the water has to flow around that. But then take a look at that little waterfall that's right in the middle of the image itself, that little piece where it's just kind of falling over the edge. Oh, that's beautiful. In the previous image, we saw that, but we saw that from the side, directly from the side. You can't really see the beauty that is in that little form. And now we have it. Oh, it's just gorgeous. I love it. So we've taken that piece that was kind of like, how can we make this better? And it's about shifting our perspective, shifting our angle, and grabbing a new frame, a different frame, with it coming through and around that object and making that object more of an important compositional element. So that's, I think, the bottom line that we see here in this shot. All right, quick announcement about the Palouse Shoot and Print Workshop. I invite you guys to check it out on the website. Go to my website, brentbergherm.com. Click on the Workshops tab or just mouse over it, whatever the case is. Go to the Palouse description page there. We're going to be exploring the Palouse and taking a fantastic look at sunrises and sunsets. During the middle of the day, we're going to be working all about post-production. I've rented an Airbnb spot, already cleared it with the owner. This event is fine. They literally say it in the description. Some events are okay. And so, yes, we have this event all approved. And I hope that you can consider joining me. I hope you'll join me there and the other photographers that will be there. There's just something about getting a group of photographers together that really just things just start to kind of, creativity, maybe I could say, starts to vibrate a little bit. And you're just like, and you're just all jazzed and you're creating more and more awesome stuff. So we're going to get out there early in the morning, later in the evening, shoot some great images, but we're going to then complete the ordeal in the studio environment where we're going to be printing your pictures. So take a look. I'd love to have you join me there and let us work on your design and creativity, your compositional skills, and just have a bunch of fun too. It's time to get out and have some fun. So let's do that in the Palouse this June, and love to see you there. This next image is a path going by a tree, a little bit backlit. We've got the gorgeous light filtering through the leaves. This is Oberg Mountain and the trail there. It's roughly in the neighborhood of 2 miles of a trail. Beautiful spot. Love this location. This is actually where I finally saw a wolf. I pulled into the parking lot and was preparing my gear, and someone was walking up from behind me. They're like, is that a wolf? They're pointing off. And got to see it for about maybe 3 seconds. He kind of walked a little bit, then went on up the trail. It was the exact opposite of this trail. So I was like, well, at least I got to see a wolf. And I did not pursue it, but it was awesome to see the wolf. All right, got on up this trail, and I only had good light for 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. Got some of these shots. I really liked the notion of the foliage, the idea of these trunks and the detail. I've seen lots of these, especially when you have the birch trees. If you're able to have the birch trees with their texture and their shapes and how it's just awesome. Now these, of course, aren't birch, but that they're very common in this area. And so I was hoping I would come across some of those. And I did. It's just by the time I did, the light was just super harsh and it was gross. So I really didn't get any shots that worked. However, in these shots, I like the difference between these two shots. I've got a shot where I've chopped off the bottoms of the trees and another shot where we included it and it goes all the way down to the path. And so there's just a different experience that you have. The first shot, more of that interpretation, more of that artistic expression of saying, look at the lichen on this foreground tree, look at the surrounding environment and what this is all about. Whereas the other one is much more inviting. You are invited to walk on into that path and go on down the path to those trees where the greater color is. It just has a different experience for you as a viewer. Also, this other image on the left, this tree trunk is just slashing pretty much right down the middle, and it's very much splitting the frame in two. So you just have this different thing. You have to get around that tree. This thing is blocking you, so to speak. You can't help but look at it. Plus the shallow depth of field means it's the only thing with detail anyway. So it's about the only thing you could look at and satisfy your need to resolve detail. All the other items sets the environment, but your brain wants to resolve those details. And so your eye is just locked on that trunk and you're going up and down that trunk. I like to do those kinds of things sometimes, especially when I have a forest like this. And since it's so rare that I shoot in a forest like this, it was a lot of fun to be able to do. I decided to come here because I had been shooting a lot of waterfalls, and I don't want to say I was getting tired of waterfalls. I was just thinking, I really probably should have some variety of what I'm shooting, right? So let's spend a day, this was Thursday of my time there, let's spend a day getting some different variety. And so it just, these colorful trees, it was bright and harsh light, but I knew I was going to have some overviews as I was going on this loop trail. And so I was going to grab those overviews with a long lens. And so here we go with some really bright, colorful trees, and then a few bright, colorful trees in this next frame with a lake there. And just, about the only type of image that I'm going to shoot on a day like this with this type of foliage. The more close in foliage, there was a lot of people on that trail. There was a hiking club, and I could tell they were looking at me and just like, oh, you're getting such beautiful images and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, not really. This is hideous light for the subject I have. I need to find something else and something that the light is appropriate for. And so I kept on going to those overviews and was able to grab some good images. All right, the light in this next one, the light continued to be really clear and really just harsh. So ended up going down and continuing the theme. I was like, well, let's head on down to Split Rock Lighthouse and get some images there, get something of the shore finally. I hadn't shot the shore yet. There's so many great spots along the shore that I just hadn't stopped at because I was all about the waterfalls. And also I just kind of, I just wanted the waterfalls. I'm just a nut for waterfalls. But in this evening, on this afternoon, I was like, you know what? It's time for more stuff like this. So let's go get the Split Rock Lighthouse. So got in there, parked the car at the parking lot, went down. Now there's this place called Pebble Beach that is really far away from the lighthouse, which you can zoom in on. And on a clear day like this, it would have been just fine. But I wanted something a little closer. I wanted something that would give me some variety in the foreground. So I walked up north and got into that region and then walked on further north as I'm getting closer and closer to the lighthouse, and then walked back, receding, basically tracing my steps as I came back as the sun was getting lower and lower. In this particular slide, we have two images. Really, I like the black and white one better myself, just again, that interpretation of the idea. Chose this framing because of where and how the water is coming in, crashing on the rocks here. Very calm. It's really interesting, the Lake Superior. When I was on Isle Royal, I had sometimes, I told you in the previous episode, I doused the camera that I was using, the Sony a6400. And here it's completely calm. Boy, howdy. It's just totally different. And it's just wonderful to walk along, get, these, you move 10 feet and it's a completely different shot. You move another 10 feet. There's just so much to explore, so much to think about and discern. Is this the best way to shoot this subject? How can I shoot the subject otherwise? So being able to explore and experience this, just a wonderful time. Just loved it. Came across another tree with its trunk going basically welded, if you will, right through the rock. So I just had to grab it. Loved the different textures between the bark and the rock, but also where those roots go and how they wrap around the rock and curl themselves around is just eye candy. It's just cool stuff. So I had to grab another shot. Right on Friday, I ended up at Gooseberry Falls State Park. Now, this is a really well-developed place. It's the closest park to the major city of Duluth State Park. Well, there is a state park there in Duluth, but As far as along the North Shore with all the waterfalls, this is the closest one. There's a lot of people there. And of course, it was Friday, so I should have expected more people there anyway, just because it's Friday. But I got there just in time before the clouds broke and it just got all harsh, and I was able to get some great images of these falls. As you can tell, I went super silky again on these rather than slowing the shutter speed down so I get a little more texture in it. I wanted us to get a feel, this grand set of falls, get a feel for that energy of the water and greater contrast in the texture between the water and the rocks. Of course, black and white once again. Here we have some detail. This is a 2-frame pano. And this image, when I took that first frame, I was setting it up and I take the first frame, I was like, no, that by itself definitely will not work. We're looking at the left-hand side of the frame. There's just no parts of interest. It's just falling water. But then when we incorporate the right-hand side of the frame, we start to have these interests where the water is crashing on the rock and kind of splashing off a little bit, and then it continues on, and then we have finally on the far right-hand side of the frame some solid rock, and it gives us that solid feeling. It gives us something that we know is a solid sensation. So I think that is to our benefit when we're looking at a waterfall image, unless you're wanting to make a completely abstract image. Of course, we could have done that, focus in on just the churning water and such, and that could make a really cool image too. But in this particular frame, I think it's really aided by the fact that we have those solid pieces there that tells us, it gives it form, it gives it purpose, it gives it shape, and it kind of solves that problem for our brain where we're just like, all this falling water, not that exciting. But then when we have all this other stuff, we have a little bit of interest. And so it starts to, those pieces start to be put together in our brain. And that's a good thing. Stepped back a little bit on this shot, got the water as it's, flowing right at my feet, so to speak. We get the main falls and then, of course, the road. That's the highway right behind it on that bridge. There's this big rock structure here on the right-hand side of the frame stretching in, and I was able to cross the river, go up around that rock, and get some other images. And that's where this image comes from, the other side of the river. So it comes down, it splits, and then it joins behind you, about 100 feet behind you or so, after it goes down another fall. There was a gentleman there that showed me a picture that he had grabbed the previous day on his cell phone. The previous night, so Thursday night, Friday morning, it rained so hard and it was such a deluge. And I was just like, enough rain already. And it was so amazing though, the difference in the waterfall from the previous day to here. This is at least 3 times the flow of water. And so if you can look at this and just imagine, okay, what would it be like with 1/3 the amount of water? Basically all these items on the left-hand side were barely a trickle, and the items on the right-hand side were about half to what they are, shown here in this frame. And to have that extra spread, to have that whole item coming through because of that rain, I was just like, yes, thank you, because this is a great shot. Now, this is still about 1/3 to 1/4 maybe of what it would be in the springtime, with even more water flowing through. But that's, again, where September is a great time to go, because you can get in, you can get close, and you can really, get your feet wet without threatening to be swept downstream. That was just awesome. Loved it. All right, if you were to take a 180-degree spin, you get this next shot here, this next view. Now, I probably did step down about another 5 feet or so to get closer to the edge here. But this is another one of those shots where I'm looking over the edge of a waterfall, and I don't usually like doing this, but sometimes it works out. Sometimes it's all right. And I kept the shutter speed slow enough so we could keep some texture in this upper location of the waterfall on the left-hand side of the frame. If I had let it go just completely silky, I don't think it would be as interesting. We want a little bit of eye candy there to keep the visual interest going. But then, of course, the surrounding elements of all these rocks, these trees, as it crashes down, there's just a beautiful framing of those elements as the water just cuts through the middle of the frame. Certainly a lot of energy as that water is coming and flowing over that that ledge and then crashing onto the ledge beneath it and then flowing again. And then we don't see where it goes. There is a little bit of mystery there. We don't see where it goes, but that's where the eye is blocked. You're brought back up and around the top. You enjoy the very dark moodiness, and then you are launched right back in the water and you're swept away again, visually speaking. This next frame, back to a detail shot. This is sort of like that one shot that I showed you where I was saying, hey, that crashing water just doesn't do anything for me. But here it's all this crashing silky water, but we still have enough of the rock coming through and what it's doing with how it's showing its stability. It's showing that the water is flowing around the rock. We have the stability, the strength happening there. So it still provides a lot of interest, I think, in this image. So we've got the two basic areas where the longer fall and then these shorter cascading areas. Super long exposure, so everything is just silky smooth. And there's just, I could put this on my wall and it would just, nice and huge mural size is what I'm thinking. I think it would just be amazing to have something like that. Super calming, super relaxing sensation to me that comes through in this image, yet a sense of security, a sense of stability that still comes through, because we see the evidence of the rock itself, but also then the rock with the water crashing over it. It gives us that sense of stability that we often are looking for in an image. All right, this next frame, again, just another experiment with shutter speed differences. And, you get to make a decision for what you like. Personally, I like the one on the lower right-hand side. There's two reasons I like that. It gives us a little more, in this frame, I want a little more texture in the water because I have a significant amount of rock shown. And so I need something that says, hey, look at me, I'm the water. But also that plant that's right in the middle on the rock, because I'm using a shorter shutter speed, the wind isn't blowing it as much, so it's more sharply rendered. And so I like that idea too. So that's just another thing. If you've got that foliage there, you really want to be thinking about your shutter speed and saying, am I getting the right shutter speed? Not only do I have to think about the water in this case, but I got to think about the foliage too and make sure that I'm not ruining the image by having that motion there. If that motion is ruining the image, that motion in the foliage ruins the image, you got to be thinking about that. And you got to find a way to make that work. Now, certainly you could then do an exposure blend of different shutter speeds. So maybe expose once for the foliage to get it nicely rendered the way you want it. And then if the water isn't doing what it needs to do, get another exposure and then just blend them together in Photoshop. Use a simple mask, blend them together in Photoshop, and it works out pretty easily. This is our last frame of this set. Taking a look here. So I showed you that image where we were looking down over the edge of, from the top. And it was just flowing on down. Here is basically the other side where the water splits I had mentioned. This is the other side where that water is. And so it's coming down, and this frame is made successful, I think, because of these trees. This is an image where I like the fact that even though it's water and waterfall, I like the fact that we're not inviting the viewer to just go on through and flow through and you're done with the image. Those trees are a visual blockade. They bring you up to the top. You then go back and swoop around. You probably will see that guy's legs and shorts that are up there, and then you start the journey again. So I like how that happens here. If you don't go up the tree, because it gets darker as you go up the tree, so you may not do that. You may go to the bottom of the frame, and then that's going to be brought back with that root at the bottom of the frame. Now, the root doesn't point you back up. It does take you off the lower right-hand corner. That's why it's really dark down there. And so you're then brought up, hopefully, by the rocks and the brighter foliage there, and then you're swept down the waterfall once again. Lots of great textures coming through, lots of great shapes and forms and the curve in that overall rock formation with where the water's going down. Lots of other visual interests here. It's just you're blockaded with those trees, and I think that's what helps make this image a little extra successful. All right, on one more announcement, and that is Latitude Photography School, the online resource that I have for helping you advance way further in your photography. I've got 2 signature courses there, whether you want to dive deep into your creative process and understanding your creative process. And this is the kind of thing where I think most photographers, especially if you are a little bit newer on the scene, or if you've been in it a long time, this might be the kind of thing that really can help jumpstart your creativity and get you back in the game with going further with your images. If you are finding that you are not achieving your goals, or you don't even know what your goals are, or you're all over the place, consider enrolling into Latitude Photography School, because we're going to help you hone your efforts, and we're going to help you create more beautiful images more consistently. We're going to take a look at your creative vision, and we're going to dive deep into what it means for you to create a successful image. And then, of course, all these ideas about design elements and your photography and your creativity. You hear a lot about rules in photography, a lot about compositional rules, compositional nudges, notions, what have you. And I like to think of it as, let's do what we can to utilize these design principles of contrast, texture, hierarchy, and so on. There's 20 of them, maybe not quite 20, but there's a bunch of them that we can utilize to our advantage if we have them and if we know what to do with them. And that's what we're all about with that class that I have, Designing Creativity and Photography. We have group sessions starting in February 2022. We're going to do 2 group sessions, not just 1, but 2 group sessions per month. And that also means then, of course, the price is increasing. So utilize this time right now, between now and January 2, when the price increases on January 2. Get signed up. You'll lock in the current price of $24 a month, or you can also do an annual rate. It's going to go up $5 a month. So if you lock it in now, it's never going to increase on you as long as you keep your account active. So give that a consideration. Sign up for Latitude Photography School. And if you'd like to gift it to somebody, let me know. I'll work with you so we can do what we can to get it gifted to someone as well. There's other links and items there as well that I'll just briefly mention, and I want to send out a big, huge thank you to those of you who have used the Lens Rentals affiliate link. That's just awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate it. It helps keep the bills paid for the podcast and such like that. So it's just really awesome. And there's also an affiliate link there for Think Tank Photo, and then a few other links there, my website, Instagram, YouTube channel, things like that. So look those up. Check it out, all the resources that are available to you, and I really appreciate, again, the support that you can provide. On the podcast website, so latitudephotographypodcast.com/donate, there's an option there where it's kind of like you've heard these notions, buy me a coffee, buy me a Diet Coke, things like that. Going with that same idea, but I decided, this is a travel podcast. Let's have it be something along the lines of travel oriented. So every dollar donated basically gets me a mile down the road, so to speak. So if that's one way that you'd like to support the show, certainly I appreciate you considering that. And I have a little thing there. Take a look at the page that's listed there, latitudephotographypodcast.com/donate, and you'll be able to take a look at the stickers I have available. So depending on what your donation level is, I have a little sticker pack that you could receive. It's only available for folks in the U.S. Those of you that are international, I'll find something else to be as a benefit for you. So check it out, and remember to take a look at that workshop as well on the main website for the Palouse. All right, that's it. I'm signing off. Thanks so much for being here. Until next time, happy shooting.